I look at the population patterns of what's going on at the moment, internal migration and overseas migrants coming over to Australia, it just makes all sense that next year there's going to be a massive boom. It's going to be even stronger than what it is today.
Along with internal migration, external migration, it's a scary sight, really. We are in a crisis, a rental crisis.
We've already got a housing issue at the moment. The cost of building has increased 40% since then.
We believe every Australian deserves a right to own at the very least 5 investment properties. I'm Adrian Trimboli.
And I'm Frank Ambezi, and welcome to the Invest in You podcast.
We are back. It's been a long time, Frank, but welcome back, my friend.
It's good to be back in the studio, you could say. Been a long time.
For all the listeners, we've taken, it's probably been about a year now off, and you can probably notice we've got the clean mics back. I've got a bit better of a setup. Ultimately, the reason why we're now kicking things off is because we've been able to build the business up to a point now where we can dedicate time every single week to speak with each other, dedicate hours speaking to each other, talking about what we're going to talk about today, but also getting people on and bringing people in and, providing as much value as we possibly can to every one of our viewers, every one of our listeners. So, Frank, welcome. What are we talking about today?
So, I guess, where is the property market going to be? Okay. The year that was, meant to be, I think it's going to be, not this year's performing pretty well, but what's going to happen next year. So what's ahead? What's going to happen, for the whole of Australia, the property market? Are we going to move in the right direction, moving, strong capital growth, or are we going to move in the opposite direction?
Yep. Absolutely. I'm interested to hear the year that was, because the year that was a lot of doom and gloom. There always is doom and gloom, but I'm interested in that. I'm interested to see what's going on. So shall we get into it?
Yeah, let's get into it. So look, today we're going to be speaking on a few different data points. Now, all this data is all backed by either ABS data or SQM data and all the research materials that are out there, CoreLogic as well. So I'm not talking here just, what my opinions are and getting these numbers, just off any, news article or, forum. These are backed from research hubs. So let's get into it. So I want to talk about, look, this year's been amazing, some strong capital growth. Like you said, there's been some doom and gloom, especially when COVID hit, 30-40% drops in the market. And we've probably seen the opposite to that, 30-40% increase in the markets year on year. And it looks like it's still happening in 2023. The only difference is this year that we really seen a decline of the real top suburbs, or LGAs, I like to call them, your local government areas, outperforming all the other markets that are, that start to drop off after the COVID boom, you like to call it. So first things first, so one of the key things that point out here is the migration pattern. So overseas migrants is over 240,000 people the Australian federal government are wanting to bring into Australia. Some of these people are high skilled workers. Some of these people are just, people that I guess your mum and dad type of people with their families migrating to Australia. So, it's a pretty big, strong population growth for the whole country. And of course, they want to be pointing these people in certain, regional towns and of course, capital cities. So with that, I look at, some of the research of, building approvals since 2021, there's been a lacking in building approvals. So if we look at some of the data here, and I will put some slides up. So if you're listening this, great. But if you're going to be watching it on YouTube, it's probably better because I'm going to have some articles up. ABS data have 27,000 dwellings that got approved to get built in August 2023. So year to date, so August 2022, there's been a reduction since then. You know how big that reduction is, H, from the amount of building approvals that got built in August 2023 compared to August 2022? 72% decrease in building approvals. So that there is a massive number. And that's including, I'm talking about, the private sector. I'm talking about the housing sector and units as well. So there's a 72% decrease in building approvals. So what I mean by that is there's less properties getting built today. Migration pattern of a strong migration pattern of 240,000 people, we've already got a housing issue at the moment. Okay. Mm-hmm. Now, the cost of building has increased 40% since then. And how I got these numbers was there's an ABS data. They've got the figures for how much the average cost was to build a house. In 2021 February, it was $319,000. In February 2022, it was $391,000 to build a house. In February 2023, it was $449,000. So that jump, there's a 40% increase since then. So which is amazing, and it's pretty scary. You know, if with building approvals dropping, building houses is more expensive today as well, 40% much more expensive. So that there, I look at that, and that's from a research perspective, you want to be getting into housing, because I look at these numbers and it's just working in our favor as an investor.
Yeah. And just from I'm going to be cheeky here, but a bit facetious. From a very logical point of view, that makes perfect sense, right? But that's not necessarily you saying if you just bought anywhere in 2021 today, that property's going to be worth 40% more because that's not you saying that. Is that correct?
Correct, of course. Now, like I say to a lot of people, and of course when I'm on social media speaking about this, it's the devil is in the data. So you got to understand and read the data. Okay, and we're reading it from a national level. Then I want to start looking at it, from a micro level, looking in suburbs or in LGAs and seeing where the data lies. Okay, because that's very important too. And then, of course, what type of approvals are they? Houses, units, apartments, townhouses, etc. So you have to be very specific and target in those areas. Okay,
yep.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. I really like the fact you've gone into that, but also just highlighting that is one piece of data.
Correct.
That's not a reason for you to get into a market or just, you need to know.
No. And look, today I want to kind of paint a picture, so then you can go back and actually have a think about this. And, if you're listening and you're looking to get into the market and you're not sure and you're trying to time the market, I'm going to give some key fundamentals here. Of course, there's a lot more to, put towards the puzzle, but these are some other things that, these are some fundamentals that are just going to give you the awareness of what's going on. So the next one I want to talk about is rental supply. So I'm going to talk about regional towns and capital cities. So if we look at from 2014, combined regional towns all across Australia, the vacancy rate combined was 6%, which is quite high. Okay, you don't want to be investing in the market at 6%. It's very dangerous as an investor. Combined capital cities in 2014, it was 4% combined, all the capital cities, 4% vacancy rate.
Yep.
Now, today, and I've got a trending graph to show this from CoreLogic as well, and I'll put this in the video. Today, in October 2023, the combined regional towns vacancy rate is 1.4%, and combined capital cities is 1.1% vacancy rate. So, yeah, that's a crisis. So, you put that in perspective, that's ridiculously low vacancy rates of properties advertised for rental as rentals. So I look at that, and I look at this big decrease, and then I start to say, okay, well, let's put this all in perspective. So April 2022, okay, this is the data I've gotten, is there was 39,616 dwellings advertised for rent. Okay. In April 2023, there was 36,785 dwellings. So literally, an extra less than 3,000 dwellings advertised for rent from the year to date from April. And that just keeps reducing. So there's less and less properties across the country.
It just seems to be getting worse and worse. Again, I just want to because those are all amazing stats. I want to reiterate though a quick thing here and only because I would also had done this 5-6 years ago when I was listening to a podcast similar. You don't just go regional towns 1.4% vacancy, combined capital cities 1.2% or 1.1%, whatever you quoted, and go, cool, capital cities is a place to go to get a better rental, right? Devil's in the data with that. But the last part there, that's the part where I get scared, especially for renters. If you're an investor, great, you can keep upping your rent, right? Because that's what ultimately this means. But if you're renting and year on year rents are going, the amount of dwellings that are up for rent is becoming less and less and less and less. It puts you in a position where you go, crap, are we going to actually be able to afford to either stay in these rents? Are we going to be able to find a rental property? So it puts people in a difficult position. So it's scary though. It is a scary fact, and something that, along with internal migration, external migration, it's a scary sight, really. We are in a crisis, a rental crisis.
Yeah, correct. And those numbers, those figures of those dwellings, that's combined capital cities. Now, I was doing research at the start of this year in February, and from February 2022 to 2023, I think there was just over 18,000 dwellings advertised for rent in regional towns. Now, these were the top 200 biggest regional cities across the country. And I don't have the figures in front of me, but don't quote me on this. But, when I done the numbers on February 2023, I know it got down to 16,000, listings advertised for rent in these top 200 capital cities. Top 200 regional towns. So, I look at that as well. That's a pretty scary number. And especially with regional towns, of course, they don't have the big, highly densified populations. So sometimes you see a bigger spark of growth from a rental perspective and a capital growth perspective when things start to happen like this in the regional towns. Okay, so which is pretty crazy. And regional has always outperformed capital cities. The best markets in Australia, top 5 best markets in Australia are regional. I'm not here to talk about that, but
sorry, just on that, just to pause you on that, because that's an interesting point. What are you referring to there? Are you referring to it from a growth point of view? What are you referring to there, just in regards to the regional versus capital? Sorry.
From both. When you look at an undersupply of building approvals, and then you start to see internal migration and overseas migration moving into a regional town, and then undersupply of rental properties, it actually has more of an impact on that market, because you don't have 5 million people living in a regional town. You might have, depending on the size, it might be 40,000, it might be 100,000, it might be 200,000. So it actually has more of an impact, especially if it gets very tight, which I've actually got some locations which we're invested in. I'm going to talk about that and show you some of the correlation and show how aggressive it's actually affected some of these markets, from a rental perspective and a capital growth perspective.
Gotcha. All right, let's keep moving. Thanks for that. That was very interesting and also very eye-opening in regards to those dwellings reducing year on year.
Yeah, so I think now I want to talk on we'll talk about rental supply. Now it's going to be rental inflation. So I've got numbers once again from CoreLogic. If we look at combined capital cities, the rents have increased about 3.4% year to date. We're in October 2023. Combined regional towns, of course, 2% year to date they've increased by. But once again, it's a very big country. And so when you start to look at the suburbs, we start to look at, okay, well, what have been some high-performing suburbs that the rents have increased a lot stronger than the Australian average? So firstly, I look at a place called Mandurah in WA. 16% the rents have increased by in the last 12 months, which is ginormous. The average growth from a rental perspective, rental growth is around 3 to 4% year on year. Yep. 16%, that's a whopping, number there. Now, next one, I like Bundaberg. We're invested in these regions. Bundaberg, 11%, and then Rockhampton in Queensland, 7%. Now, full disclaimer, I don't say these locations to go there and invest. I don't think it is a great time to invest in these regions. We were investing in these regions back in 2021, and you kind of missed the boat. As you can see, we've already had some strong rental growth, and of course, there's been some very strong capital growth. But I just wanted to list a few regions here to give you guys a bit of context of what has happened in these regions since then.
Yep. I look at all these regions and I go, oh, hang on, I've got a property there, I've got a property there, I've got a property there. So that's very, very cool. And again, maybe just another note on that. We're not saying that these regions are not going to perform short and long term. They definitely will. I think what you were just alluding to is there's been exceptional growth. I think I've had especially my Bundaberg property, over 40% growth in the last 2 years. I think that's what you're alluding to. Not that it's going to not perform over the next 3, 4, 5 years, but yeah, other regions that you could buy at the earlier periods. Yes, absolutely.
Correct. And you want to get it. You want to get there at the very beginning. Now it's hard to time the market at the very bottom, but of course you can have a look at data points, and if it's already had like 40-50% growth or more, why get into that market when you can get into other markets that are kind of just starting its growth phase? So
sorry, just on that, Frank. So 16%, 11%, 7%. Just for the viewers and the listeners, what's that ultimately mean? Like, how many rentals are up at the particular time? I know it's going to be different for everyone. Like, how many applications are you getting on each one of the properties that you're buying there? Like, what's that kind of look like?
Yeah, so look, it's a great question. It just depends on the suburb there of these, Bundaberg and, Rockhampton and Mandurah. Some of these properties you're probably getting anywhere from 5 to anywhere 20 applications, depending on the property and of course the location of it. I do recall some clients, getting, I remember when we were buying in Rocky, 14 applications. Same with Bundaberg, same with Mandurah. It's pretty crazy to see. And we used to get a lot, especially in the early times. And some of our clients have locked in some good tenants, but it was always the odd one, getting an extra 10 or 20 bucks because, it was so tough to find a rental property that tenants were putting an extra, 10 or 20 bucks on the application just so they can secure the property.
Yep. Perfect.
Pretty crazy. Now, some of those areas, there was only like 1 or 2 properties advertised for rent. And some of the locations that we're investing in today, same thing. There's a town we're investing in. It's kind of starting to take off, and there's only one investment property advertised for rent. That's a house, freestanding house. So it's pretty crazy.
Yep.
But anyway,
So if I could just throw in a quick little tip there, something which I know you guys all like to do. I say you guys as in us on the team. If you're buying a property that's vacant, potentially, if doable, putting in the clause that you're able to actually put the property up for advertisement to try and rent the property in between or before the settlement period. That way, settlement time, when it comes, potentially already having a tenant in there, so you're not losing any rent. But anyway, keep going.
so next metric I want to measure is sales listings. So sales listings is very important. Understanding, how many properties are advertised for sale. That gives us an understanding of capital growth. So, and just showing the supply on the market. Now, at the moment, total advertised supply levels for combined capital cities. Year to date at the moment, they're at a 15% decrease compared to this time last year. Okay. Now, it's 19% below the previous 5-year average. So how CoreLogic they measure a 5-year average on sales listings. And so what happens is now at the moment, there's a 19% decrease compared to the last 5-year average. So that's just showing us that there's a massive undersupply of properties advertised for sale. Now, combined regional towns have the same problem, of course, a total of 6.4% year to date, and it's about 6.1% below the 5-year average. So as you can see, in the last 5 years, it's just been reducing. And that there is showing us there's an undersupply of properties coming to the market. And when I start to look at the building approvals, rental supply, rent inflation, and then sales listings, and this starts all stack up with each other, it starts to show that there's going to be a massive demand. It's a death by 1,000 cuts. I always use this analogy with property. We haven't had this problem just fall out of the sky today. It's been happening for a long time, for over 5 years. And so when it reaches a tipping point, you start to really see the prices start to increase dramatically and quickly in some of these places because of this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes perfect sense. I guess, again, I put myself in the position of the viewer and listening to this, and there's always skepticism when listening to all these facts and all these data. I think all the data points. I think one of the big things that I always like to allude to is the fact that you and I mean, and even actually quite a bit of the team, we've got access to all this data. We've got access to all these facts. We've got access to all these properties. We all have had very active years in property ourselves, extremely active years, bought many, many properties. And why is that? Because of all this stuff. We've been buying property now for every year very consistently, but especially this year, I think just the internal team, we've probably purchased, double-digit properties for ourselves, for our own portfolios. There is a reason for that, right? We look at properties all day, every day. So, yeah, interesting point.
Where this is funny is you see all these economists and all these people on TV talking about the property market crashing, not going to perform, et cetera, et cetera. They've got the access to all this, and for some reason, they just don't know how to put all the pieces together, which is quite interesting because, if you listen to these people, 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 5 years ago, you're the person that's missed out on the boat, leaving and catching all that growth. Now, put this in perspective right now, because this is pretty cool data, and I'm looking at this, and it's pretty scary. Just looking at combined capital cities, last year, this time, there was 87,835 active listings advertised for sale.
Gotcha.
Today, there's 77,385 active listings at the end of September. That's more than 10,000 listings that aren't advertised for sale. So there's been a 13.5% drop in listings advertised for sale. That's just capital cities combined, okay, which is pretty crazy. Now, once again, I say the devil is in the data. So when we start looking at LGAs, I always want to target these locations that we've been investing in and having a look at what's going on here today with some of these areas. So let's have a look at places like I said, we mentioned Bundaberg, okay? So Bundaberg, last year, this time, there was 1,006 properties advertised for sale. Today, there's 882 houses advertised for sale. I'm just talking houses, no units. That's a 12% decrease in the market, okay, in 12 months. If we go to Mandurah, WA, this time last year, 918 houses advertised for sale. This year, right now, 675 houses. That's a 26% decrease, which is ginormous. And then lastly is Rockhampton. Okay, 223 houses last year. Today, 157 houses advertised for sale. That's a 29% decrease. So I look at this, I look at my building approvals, I look at my rental supply, I look at my rental inflation, I look at my sales listings, and then, okay, I look at the population patterns of what's going on at the moment, internal migration and overseas migrants coming over to Australia. This just makes all sense that next year there's going to be a massive boom. It's going to be even stronger than what it is today. Okay, and I say that with full confidence as well, but of course there is a lot more to it. We have to look at jobs getting created. We have to look at infrastructure pipeline, government policies. We have to look at a whole bunch of other things as well in these areas that add to the pieces of the puzzle. But, the solution to this is really just build more properties. Okay, but if we look at it, it's quite difficult. If building supplies, have increased about 25 to 30% for timber, which is crazy. It used to take 6 to 12 months to build a house, where today it's more than 12 months. And so, there was an article that came out from Domain, and it's pretty crazy. Builders talking about what's going on at the market. So when you got a 40% increase on how to build a brand new property, and then of course a 25 to 30% increase on timber, and it's taking longer to build property compared to what it was before COVID, how are we going to fix this problem? It's going to be very difficult, and it's always been very difficult. That's why all these data points have been trending in a decrease in supply and rental supply as well, and listing supply, for more than 10 years. So like I said, it's death by 1,000 cuts. So I look at it, if you're, ready to invest, you've got the capital, you've got the income, you're in a good position, and you've done your research, it's time to get in. I do believe, and that's what we're doing, Adrian and I. A lot of these markets we just mentioned, we're invested in, our clients are invested in. And so it's a pretty hot topic. And I think with all the numbers I've just mentioned, it's pretty crazy of what's happening at the moment. Once again, it's all facts, ABS data, CoreLogic, SQM data. These are some of the big data sources that the banks use and the media outlets.
Yep. I love it. And this is, the detail is in some of the results. So that's awesome as to what your beliefs are and what's kind of happened from a data point in the last 12 months. I guess in regards to property prices and what you've been seeing, what have you seen in the last 12 months? Have you been seeing kind of, call it the COVID growth? Because that's what it was told all over the media and whatnot. Have you seen properties growing by 20% plus or not necessarily?
Yeah, of course. I've seen properties growing 10%, 20%, 30%. A couple of our best performing properties, which, it blows my mind, is, we've had 54% in 2 months. And people might think that's all hocus pocus, but it's, could get the client on here and they can even explain it. But it's pretty crazy. But the consistency has been there since COVID. And since COVID's gone, why is the consistency staying in some of these regional hubs and or other capital cities that we're investing in? Is because of, the research behind this, and we're being backed by, what I'm talking about today. We use that for our clients. So, and sustainability is there because of what's going on. Some of the regions we're investing in, it's got the most strongest internal migration pattern. What I mean by that is people internally in Australia migrating to other places around Australia. We're in some of these big regional towns where have strong internal migration, which have a big effect on property prices and rental prices as well. So, it's when you're following the data and you understand what's going on, that you're going to succeed because you have done your calculations correctly, if that makes sense.
Yep. No, it makes perfect sense. I can tell you that just from my own portfolio, I always just like to talk about my own portfolio. I've had my best year yet in regards to the growth. Obviously, it's a lot easier if you have multiple properties as opposed to just the one and relying on one. But in regards to growth, this year and really last year, the last kind of 18 months, been my best year. So that's pretty cool. Frank, that is it. 25 minutes of pure data. So to all the listeners, I hope that was